everyone. This is our first podcast for Criminal Justice Cafe. I'd like to say hello. My name is Jacqueline. I am a criminal justice advocate, currently in school for my master's for criminal justice and my doctorate for social work. And we have our first guest today. Norm Pattis is a longtime Connecticut defense attorney. And I thought for our first show, it'd be great to have a defense attorney on and hear about the rituals that Norm has to go through to defend white collar criminals. So I'll get a little bit into my background, if that's okay, and then I'll leave it to you, Norm. I met Norm accidentally, not when people want to meet an attorney, because, I came to Norm because I had been indicted by the federal government for mortgage fraud back in 2008 was my crime. And I needed a defense attorney. And I had a great defense attorney who just did not want to rock the boat and ask for nothing for me. So I found Norm. My husband and I went to Norm's office and I said to Norm, I don't know, the defense attorneys that, I don't know if you remember this, Norm. I said, the defense attorneys all want to ask for 6 months. And Norm said, the hell with that. I'm going to go in and ask for nothing. So I ended up getting a year and a day, and I only spent 7 months in Danbury in 2015. So I came home, and when I came home, I decided to help women who are going in and coming home from prison and started Evolution Reentry. So that's kind of how I also have given Norm complete rights on this podcast to talk about my case if we get into it, just to waive that privilege, because I know that's very sacred to you. So Norm, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you say, I've been practicing criminal law for a long time. I've earned each one of these gray hairs in my beard. This is a new COVID-topia flourish. I, like everybody else in March, came home and expected to die, took my temperature several times a day and eventually got tired of that and realized I was likely to survive. So I grew a beard because I was bored. Summer came, I shaved it off because I was bored. Fall came, I grew it back because I was bored. And now I'm letting it grow because guess what? I'm bored.
You're bored.
There are no courts to go to, no trials. We haven't had a criminal trial in Connecticut, at least since February. I spend a little bit of time each day on the phone with prosecutors and judges, or most days anyhow. And as near as we can tell, there probably won't be criminal trials again in Connecticut until mid-2021. And that's a long break. A lot of people are sitting in high anxiety wondering what will become of them. But I'm sort of an accidental lawyer. There were no college graduates in my family. A high school guidance counselor called me into her office one day. I thought I was in trouble again, like, I don't know what I do. And she said, what are your plans? I didn't really have any. I wanted to get a high school diploma because that seemed like a good thing. And she said, well, you always blow the lid off these standardized tests, but your grades stink. Well, what do you want to do? I said, I have no idea. Thought I'd want to go. I wanted to go to California, and I heard the weather was good there. She said, well, if I could get you into college, would you go? And I said, yes, I suppose. But I need to get out. I was miserable at home. I mean, I should be candid with you. My father disappeared when I was 7 or 8, and he didn't reappear in my life till I was in my 40s, believe it or not. And my mother struggled and ended up living with a guy who didn't care for me. So I was going to night school and day school to get out.
In Connecticut? You were here?
No, this was in Detroit, in Michigan.
Oh, Detroit. Okay.
And that must have looked somewhat extraordinary to the school. Here's this kid whose grades are for shit, excuse my language, whose grades are for feces, and who, comes to class but zoned out all the time. And so she got me the Mother's Club scholarship. They let me out of my senior year just before the Christmas break, and I went to a teacher's college in Michigan for about a year and a half to learn how to study and prove myself. And I transferred to Purdue and ended up at Columbia and taught at Columbia for a while, taught in the political science department, and then went to law school just because I was curious about how the world worked. And I'm a good student, as it turns out.
Well, you love philosophy too, right?
Right. Yeah. And who would have thought that, so I learned how to study and realized there was no drug like the learning curve. So John Williams in New Haven gave me my start as a lawyer in the early 90s. And I just gravitated to criminal defense. I'm astounded at the things the state can do to people. I have issues with authority. No surprise there. I'm 65 years old and I got hair down the middle of my back. And so I'm happy as a criminal defense lawyer. It's where I belong.
Well, I know you get a lot of controversy for a lot of the cases you take. And I have to say, I believe everybody deserves a defense. I believe that. So I wholeheartedly give you such kudos, and I respect you greatly for taking on the hard cases, a lot of attorneys I don't think would take on. And
I like the hard cases. The harder they are, the more inspiring they are. I remember, my wife likes to turn the television on in the morning to get the traffic report, so I know where not to go, and the weather, so I know what to wear. She takes good care of me. And one day I turn on the television and there's a story of a guy who's accused of throwing his 7-month baby off the bridge. And I looked at her, I said, now that's a case. And, a couple of weeks later I had it. And it was a very difficult case. But there was no place in the state of Connecticut or in the United States that I would rather have been than standing beside Tony Moreno as we faced those charges. It was a heartbreaking case, but I was where I wanted to be.
And how do you, as a defense attorney, I mean, I have a lot of clients, women that are recently sentenced, waiting to go to prison to self-surrender. How do you deal with, like in the Tony Moreno case, you knew he was going to prison?
Well, all advocates fall in love with their own theory. And our theory was that he was with the child and the child did what's called a myoclonic jerk. You know how infants sometimes do one of these, and slipped out of his arms. That may or may not be what happened. He testified to that, but the text messages that he had sent to the mother of his child shortly before the child went into the water made it sound intentional. And I think the jury concluded that it was. So I don't view prison as a constructive place for anyone. I think that, some people are dangerous to society, and I suppose we need prisons. But I've yet to meet the person who's come out of prison a better place. We hurt families, we pretend that we're doing so-called justice, but we're really not restoring anything in prison. We're stealing time and breaking hearts. And maybe I'm sensitive to it because, as I said, my father disappeared one day and he was absent from my life. He wasn't in a prison, but he was gone. And what good did that do? It did me no good. What good does prison do? So it's easy for me to fight the consequences of that, the consequences of a conviction. It's harder to stand next to a client when they're in such despair and terror and anxiety, and that's extremely difficult.
I can imagine. I mean, the mental health. I know when I went through my case, I have 3 kids. I've actually done a podcast with my daughters and how it affected them. I went for a very small amount of time compared to some of the women that I've met, and the casualties were my family, and the collateral damage to my kids. And they were teenagers and they needed their mother and put me away. And as you know, in any federal camp, the women are utilized, pretty much they're satellite camps. Women are utilized to keep the larger prison going. I mean, we're electricians, you learn to be a plumber, you learn to be a carpenter or grounds. So you're working for 37 cents an hour, taking care of this big, large prison. And that's what they're utilizing these camps for. And I can't see there's no rehabilitation at all being done.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I remember meeting you and your family and just being dumbstruck once again by the blind irrationality of the system. In the federal courts, sentencing is governed by a cookbook called the Sentencing Guidelines. And the theory is that each offense gets a certain number of points, and then the offender's characteristics and the offense characteristics either yield addition or subtraction of points. And so there's an argument in the end about how many points a crime is worth. And then off the person goes. You didn't belong in prison. I mean, you were involved in a mortgage business that was tricky and it was difficult. And, arguably you colored out outside of some of the law's lines. But the consequences that you paid in terms of anxiety in your professional life were great enough to deter and punish you. Prison was a gratuitous insult that did no one any good. And, it was extremely difficult. I appreciate how gracious you were throughout the case, because, I do remember that first meeting, and you were, your lawyers wanted you to ask for 6 months. And I'm like, what the hell's up with that? I mean, if you're going to ask for 6 months, ask for nothing, make them give it to you. Because, and I do remember, I don't recall, Jackie, who was your sentencing judge?
Janet Bond Arterton.
So she's tough. I mean, there was a judge now deceased who used to refer to her as the Queen of England. She comes off as regal and detached, and goes through her guidelines exercises with all of the charm of an accountant telling you what you owe the IRS. And it's so, I remember telling you that I couldn't promise you that you'd go home. There was a substantial likelihood that you'd go to prison, but if you didn't fight for your freedom, you'd regret every day you went away. I still think the year and a day was too much, but I remember meeting with you. I remember meeting your kids. I remember meeting your husband, and just feeling this tremendous sense of personal impotence. That, here was this train barreling down the tracks at you, and you'd placed your life in my hands and given me permission to do anything the law would permit me to do to stop the train, and I couldn't stop it. And the result was, it didn't kill you, but it cost you a limb. It cost you and your family part of your life.
And the mental health success. The mental health around that for an attorney, I don't think people realize what you must go through defending anybody, because I did put my life in your hands, and the outcome.
No, I think that there's a high rate of substance abuse among lawyers, and I mean, suicide rate isn't as high as it is for dentists. That's because we get to engage our clients as opposed to just drill them. And you end up with a dark humor. We have very dark humor in our office, and that's kind of how we balm the wound. I mean, I wish I knew what to say. I mean, it drives me to my knees. I'm constantly reading the Psalms, and often read with clients Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. And that's a commitment I can make to a client, to be with them in the valley of shadow of death. But at the end of the case, they go in that cell door, and I don't go with them.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Do you need to seek outside help?
Oh, I have for years. My wife is a mental health professional, and she's had serious and significant health issues. So about 12 years ago, she was at a crossroads where it was unclear whether she'd live or not. Frankly, it was about the time of your case, I think.
Wow.
And, obviously that's my problem, not yours. You brought me your life, as did many other clients. And I had an office full of people whose paychecks I had to figure out how to honor. And so I went to see a counselor, and I said, what am I going to do if she dies? I've got 3 kids, I've got clients, I've got employees, I got people who need me. And so her situation resolved well. She's alive and healthy. But I stuck around for psychoanalysis. So 4 days a week at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm on a couch for an hour, howling at the moon with a psychoanalyst. And we've been at it for about 12 years. I don't know the answers yet, but I'm getting a pretty good sense of what some of the questions are. And I know I need them. I know that what you depend on from me in court is a clear-sighted assessment of your chances, an evaluation of what the government can prove, what I can keep the government from proving, what proof I can offer. You want me to know the rules of evidence, have a relationship with the judge, and understand the Constitution and how your constitutional rights will play out in a courtroom. So that a lot is required. And, my own issues have the potential to get in the way. So my view is every lawyer should probably be in psychoanalysis, because if you're not troubled by what you're seeing every day in your office, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that as a social worker, and a lot of the women that I work with, they get very frustrated with their attorneys because their attorneys aren't listening. That, I mean, you can't be a social worker. I remember you said that to me. I'm not your therapist. Do you want me to do a good job? Because
yeah,
it's hard not to think your attorney is your therapist as well. You want to tell them all your problems.
Well, so there's a certain amount of deceit that goes into the formation of the attorney-client relationship. In theory, I'm going to be your savior. And I think every client harbors the belief that their white knight will deliver them from all evil, and that they'll walk away and live happily ever after. And that's the fairy tale vision of lawyering. And there are lawyers who cultivate that and nurture that. And some lawyers are content to play a counseling role. I'm easily overwhelmed, and candidly, the way my office works is I have a number of people that I try to get my clients to work with along the way and talk to me only as a measure of last resort. And some clients are deeply offended by that, and I encourage them to go elsewhere. I can't be all things to all people. I'm pretty good in a courtroom. I'm pretty good on my feet. But you know, I'm not very good at helping you understand that there will be life at the end of the catastrophe. My job is to try to keep you out of prison or minimize the time in. And once you go, there's not much I can do for you. And it's a bad place. It's a bad business model. I've enjoyed the pandemic.
I could imagine. I tell you though, it is true, because when you were representing me, I wanted to hear, you're not going to prison. That's what I wanted to hear. And that's all I wanted to hear. And I felt if I didn't hear that, then there's nothing else. And I remember speaking to Brittany in your office at that time, and she was wonderful. She was really wonderful. She said, Norman's going to do the best he can do for you, but you have to do the work inside your head yourself. Because
well, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's, you know, and, you know, when the phone call, at the end of the day, when you've, you know, got to decide how many of these phone calls can I actually return, or how much trouble will I be in if I don't return them all? You know, I know the easy thing to say is, Jackie, don't worry about it. I got you. You're going to be fine. And saying that serves me, but it doesn't serve you, because you'll believe that. And if you're not fine, you'll feel betrayed at the end, and you'll feel that I am the one who betrayed you. So it's tempting to tell people what they want to hear. But shame on you if you do. A lawyer's responsibility is unyielding loyalty to their client, to be their advocate and their advisor. And, you know, what I get paid to do is to listen to you and to study your case and to tell you what I see, what moves I see on the law's chessboard, and what your chances are of ultimately winning or losing quickly. And then help you make the best decision you can. Another way to look at it is, and I tell this to the young lawyers in my office, your job is to learn what your client's interests are, what it is they want, and then to know what the law is and to counsel them on whether their interests are actually, or objectives or goals are actually reasonable. If they're not, you still fight for the client, but you got to tell them that they're being unreasonable. And if they want to choose a new lawyer, let them. I mean, you know, I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I get hate mail, you know, so I get nice mail and I get hate mail. 99.9% of people could give two beans about me. But
I do see some of those incredible Facebook posts underneath things. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I mean, hey, you know, I don't pay the rent for the space I occupy in other people's heads, but I enjoy the occupancy.
Right? If you're affecting, you might as well affect somebody, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, I like a good fight, you know, and I mean, I love going into a courtroom when the world is angry at your client and just kind of saying, here I am, what are you going to do with it? You know, I always joke with prosecutors, there are two ways that we can work this case out. I'll tell them early on. There's my way and the hard way. I'll let you choose. But if you choose the hard way, I'm going to make it a lot harder than you can imagine. And that's as much as
Oh my God, that is something I say often. Look, there's two ways to do this, the easy way or the hard way.
Yeah.
Either way, I'm going to get what I want. So let's just do it the easy way, because I'm going to get to the end result. Is going to be the end
Save us
result.
both some aggravation.
I'm curious as to what you think about, I mean, particularly women, because I work with women with COVID-19 and the prisons, especially Danbury. I know Coleman Camp in Florida, they're using the SHU as quarantine. And women, I know two women who had to self-surrender within the last 2 months. They go right into quarantine and they're stuck in the SHU by themselves, can't contact their families, can't talk to anybody. So quarantine should be quarantine, not be isolation. And that's what is happening. How do you feel about that?
You know, I haven't had many clients go to prison during the quarantine because the courts are effectively shut. I've had a lot who are in and trying to get out, and that those have posed difficult problems. The use of solitary confinement or isolation, you know, is unfortunate in those circumstances. I've never gone. I spent one night in jail in college, or over a bar fight, frankly. Before
Wait,
we
did you
moved
win?
on. What?
Did you win?
Well, nobody won. I think we all behaved like juvenile jerks, and we got what was
Hence
coming.
jail, right? That's jail.
Well, and when we went to court, they didn't even have a file. They just let us go. So I think they figured we'll teach these kids a lesson, So I don't know how I would respond. I think that, going into prison is terrifying, because everybody's checking one another out, and, you want to be yourself and you want integrity, but you don't want to be taken advantage of, and you don't want to show too much because you don't want to be manipulated or abused. So I would, if I were going in, I think I would welcome the solitaire for a while, so I could kind of get used to the sound of the doors shutting and cope with that initial sense of longing to see family and that initial sense of loss before I got thrown into population. But as far as COVID-19 is concerned, early in the pandemic, I was contacted by a lot of prison guards who were concerned that the prisons were doing nothing for anyone in there. And in some jurisdictions, including New York, or was it New York? It might have been, no, it was Washington, D.C. Prison guards and prison families actually joined in litigation against the prisons to do a lot. It hasn't been as bad as I thought it would be. I thought there'd be a lot more deaths. It's been very hard to get people out. A couple of the women that I've dealt with over the years who are in have not had any success in getting out. They're in for very long sentences, one mandatory life. I think the prisons, like general society, got caught by surprise by COVID and have done a horrible job of attending to people's real needs.
Yeah, I know in Danbury there's only 45 women there now. I mean, when I was there, it was 213.
Wow.
And COVID is pretty bad there. I have a woman that's self-surrendering January 4th to Danbury, and she's terrified, and it's a white-collar case.
And I mean, what in the world is wrong with a federal judge to send somebody to prison in the midst of a pandemic? If they're out on home release right now, pending sentencing, wait for them to be vaccinated and then send them in. So we're in the process of working out a case for a man, a state court case. And our deal is he'll plea, but he doesn't begin his sentence until after he's been vaccinated. Why not? I mean, what's the rush? I mean, it's, a year, 2 years isn't supposed to be a death sentence, and the terror of being around strangers in that environment shouldn't be amplified by the exposure to COVID. I don't know. I mean, as you know the statistics as well as I do. We've got 25% of the world's prison population, but only 5% of the world's prison, and we call ourselves the land of the free. I mean, what is this fascination with prison? What are we doing?
Oh, it's terrible. And I've had recently a big problem with. I'm learning more and more about our bail system. We talked about that a little bit. It's so many people that are sitting in prison during COVID-19 who've never been convicted of a crime. They're not convicted of anything. They just don't have the money to bail themselves out. They're given a bail. They don't have the money. So they're sitting there waiting. And like you said, courts are closed. Why not release those people? You're not convicted of a crime yet.
No, I hear you. I mean, bail has several functions, and it's governed by the 8th Amendment, and you're entitled to a reasonable bail. And the functions of bail are to assure that you turn up to court and in part to protect the community. But very few defendants prey upon the community. I mean, there are very few people that warrant a high bail as a measure of keeping everyone else safe. Yeah. I think that it's an outrage that people are required who are presumed innocent and are not a real or serious threat to themselves or others, are kept behind bars for failure to pay bail. But it happens all the time.
You've been in this so long, Norm. What advice do you give any prison advocate? Like for me, I'm getting into this. I'm back in school. I'm learning so much. And then I think to myself, it's not going to change. I get frustrated. Who's going to change it? If it hasn't changed by now, am I wasting my time pushing? On the mental health side, I know I'm making a difference, but there's no common sense. The BOP, no common sense.
I mean, your prelude sort of said it all. I've been at it so long. I mean, I turned 65 in September. And I've been out of court for the better part of 2020, which is the first time in my professional life that I've spent months out of court. And I've come to enjoy it a little too much. I don't know if I'm coming back at this point. I would give up on systemic reform. And I would say you know, when you go fishing, you don't try to empty the fish of all, or the ocean of all the fish in the sea. You just want one that tastes good, or two, depending on how big your family is. I think you can't save the system, but you can redeem people one person at a time. So I know a person, and I don't want to reveal their secrets, but who is doing mandatory life without the possibility of parole, and the walls are closing in on this person. And I've done all that the law permits me to do to try to get them out. I've been to the prosecutor asking for mercy. I've been in various courts in the state and federal system, and I have failed at every step of the way. And the crime that this person was convicted of was horrendous, but it was many, many years ago. And so I watched the walls close in, and I watched this person's mental health deteriorate little by little as they lose hope. And I'm exhausted by it, and I don't know what to do. So I gave the only gift that I knew how to give, and I had to fight to get them that. I bought them a leather-bound copy of the Catholic Missal and taught them how to use it, and encouraged them to seek grace and redemption through the power of a loving God who remains ever present but always out of view. And, you know, that's frankly what I've been driven to in my life, was the sense that this is really all a meaningless charade, and that we're all broken by the wheel of fortune, but somehow, some way, we can each be an instrument of grace for another person. And so I look at each client as a potential opportunity to do that. And I don't do systematic reform because I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't have a good, that's my answer. Find somebody that you resonate with, and share the best that you have to offer with them, and then be there for them from time to time when they need you. You can't do more than that. That's being the good shepherd. You know, a shepherd, I've got a border collie. She's at my feet right now.
Oh, my daughter has a border collie.
And, you know, so I spent a lot of time studying the behavior of sheep and dogs. And, you know, a good shepherd doesn't know where each sheep is always, but he's a beacon, and he keeps an eye out for the wayward sheep and looks for them. And there's a reason that's a powerful metaphor in the New Testament. So I think all we can be is shepherds for the troubled souls among us. Some of them will come back, and their lives will be redeemed, and they'll put them back together, and some will be broken, and some will kill themselves. I mean, you know, in my professional career, I've had any number of suicides by clients, and those are always particularly heartbreaking.
Oh, that's gotta be horrible for an attorney, for any lawyer defending somebody, and something like that happens.
It's understandable, though. I mean, a case, I won't say more than this, you know, client was suicidal at one point. I put him on a suicide watch. He was furious. When I went back to see him, why'd I do that? That was hard. But I said, you know, you're my responsibility. It's a very difficult case. I did it again 6 months later. He almost fired me. I said, well, you can, but I mean, I'm here to care about you. So we got to the end, and he had to make a life-breaking and heartbreaking decision. And he said, and I said, you're quiet. What's up? He said, I'm afraid to tell you what I'm thinking for fear that you'll narc me out again. And I said, no, you know, I've thought a lot about your situation. And if you choose to kill yourself, I'll understand. I hope you won't do it. But that's a rational response to what the government's putting you through. He didn't. And, you know, that's that. But I mean, that's real. That's life. That's lawyering.
Oh, it is true, though. I know what I was facing, and the depression and the anxiety, and I had thoughts in my head in the very beginning. I did not know what to expect at all. And I had a shepherd. You sent Babs to me.
Yeah.
And she came over to my house, sat me down. She said, look, girl, I'm going to give it to you real. Straighten up. Put on your big girl pants.
Is that what she said?
Yeah.
That would be Babs. Yeah.
I love her. I just absolutely love her. And
you know, Babs is another former client, and she has been an instrument of grace to me because, you know, I don't have permission to talk about her case, but suffice it to say, she's a good woman, and the system hurt her. Not that badly as hurt-uns go in federal court, but more than I thought was necessary. And I felt like I let her down. And she made a point of reaching out to me to make sure I was okay. And I thought, wow, this person is larger than the life I live.
Oh, and she is. Every time I feel like I'm sad, all I do is look at, she's in our women's group, and her face just lights everybody up. She's fantastic. And I decided to do what she does. And like you said, one woman at a time. I just try, and I have the one girl that's going to be self-surrendering, and she's a priority right now. Anytime she calls, I'm here. In the next 3 weeks, she's a mess. She doesn't know. When I went in, if it wasn't for Babs, I didn't know what to expect. My husband had me going to Krav Maga classes to defend myself. I was going to a camp, and because I never knew how to fight, he said, "You better defend yourself." And Babs was like, "Are you kidding me? You defend yourself. You don't have to do that." That's what women need.
Yeah.
They need a good lawyer like you to defend them and do what they can, and they need somebody aside from the attorney who's going to prepare them. And the sad thing is when they come home, they can't talk to another felon. And again, that is something that.
Yeah, that really is crazy. I mean, you've done your time, and what do they think you're going to do? Get together and decide how to rob Wells Fargo or something?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact is, until you've got that scarlet F painted on your forehead and you've been stigmatized, you don't know what it is to be alone. And so you come home and you want coping skills. You want to learn from somebody who's walked the road you're on. Oh, you can't talk to a felon. I mean,
Yeah.
So what are you supposed to do? Make a call, talk to the judge who sentenced you? They're too busy.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And it doesn't go away. I mean, it's 10 years later for me. And just the other day, I had new neighbors move in. And I'm going to do a shout out to retired Brantford officer, Robin Hunt. I want to say thank you. As she drove up to my neighbor's house to tell them about my crime. And proceeded for the past 10 years, everybody who's come into my neighborhood, she decides to tell them that I am not worthy of talking to me. And this is 10 years later.
Wow.
So I've decided to stop taking the high road there. I'm going to admit it. I'm not taking the high road. I'm calling her out every time I can. So Robin Hunt, if you want something to say, you can come up and just tell me how you feel, because she doesn't know me.
You should invite her as a guest on the podcast and ask her why she does that, what justification there is for it, and what urge to hurt people. Does she satisfy with that? How much is enough?
That's my point. My point is, I have never had a conversation with her ever in the 17 years I've been living here. And she doesn't know me, but yet she feels the need to hurt me. And
Wow.
I don't understand that with people. Humanity today, I mean, we can go on and on about humanity and people hurting people, but that's a direct thing. And that's what felons deal with their whole lives. So I think one of the things for me, and especially with this podcast, is to let people see that a felon is a real person and there is redemption and there are second chances, and defense attorneys are real people. So the death threats.
Went on TV.
I wanted to show that here. I said I got to show Norm.
There's a wonderful book written by a man named Harvey Silverglate in Boston called 3 Felonies a Day. And he makes a really interesting point. And that is, at the time that the federal constitution was enacted, there were roughly 40 recognized federal criminal offenses. There are about 40 ways you could become a criminal in the eyes of the federal law. Now, lawyers can't count the number of ways, because by the time you combine accessory with or conspiracy, so-called inchoate offenses, with substantive crimes, drug possession, fraud, this, that, it ends up being tens of thousands of potential crimes. And Silverglate's position was that anybody commits probably 3 felonies a day without even knowing it. And prosecutors then have the ability to pick and choose who they want to hurt with that designation. I think the good book has a lot to say. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And I've not been convicted of a felony, but I'm not going to claim to have been perfect. I've hurt people. I've made errors in my life, and my errors have cost people things. I get that. I come back swinging and fighting every day, as have you. I don't have the designation of a felony, so my life is easier than yours. Yours is unbearably harder in that way. I think laws like banning the box, like making it impossible to consider a person's felony, are important. I think that we should also get rid of the disabling consequences of a felony. It's the debt that you never really repay. And there should come a time where we've said, whatever the penal consequences of your misconduct were, they're done now. Welcome home. That's what I always say to prisoners when they come out. Welcome home. Welcome back to the world. I mean, one of the best days in my life as a lawyer is about 15 years ago. I was in the office, and Donna, remember Donna?
Yeah. Oh, we're very good friends. Yeah.
So-and-so is here, my office manager. So-and-so is here to see you. And I said, so-and-so, he's in prison. What the, send him back. So he came in and I said, when did you get out? He said, about 3 hours ago. I'm on my way home. I just wanted to say thank you. And again, it was a little act of grace. And here I am talking about it 14, 15 years later. Or again, there was a prisoner who I never had met and hadn't represented. But he was doing some federal time, I think in Pennsylvania. And 2 or 3 times a year, he'd send me a package of New Yorker cartoons. And they were always pretty funny. And we'd write back and forth. And one day he showed up in the office. And I said, what are you doing here? He said, well, I just wanted to meet you after all these years. And he said, I have a beef with you. I said, a beef? Thanks.
Everyone has a beef with me. Get in line.
There's the card number 675, and I'll see you in about 2 years. I said, what's your beef? I didn't even represent you. He says, I referred all sorts of people to you for post-conviction relief. You didn't take any of their cases. I said, why not? And I said, well, because I studied them and I didn't think there was anything I could do for them. So what am I going to do? Take their money and then tell them, oh, well, blame it on the judge? And he said, you're not entitled to make that judgment. People are looking for hope. As long as you're honest with them, and tell them that their odds are long. If they want to take the risk, they're investing in hope. And that conversation changed my perspective on post-conviction relief claims. And that he's still out and about in Waterbury. I hear from him from time to time. So
that's incredible. Let me ask you something. What do you think of these prison consultants that are charging exorbitant amount of fees to people? I almost hired one before I went in because he called me up. Oh, I can get you less time, and they almost try and act like an attorney. And
some of them are quite good. So I mean, I know the criminal law about as well as anybody else alive, I think, but I don't keep track of all the prison programs, and there are just too many of them. And so a good prison consultant will know what you should do to maximize your possibility of an early release. So, for example, many lawyers don't know about the RDAP program in federal court, where if you're sentenced to a certain amount of time and you've got, you can complete drug or alcohol treatment, you can get some time off. So prior to entering a plea, everybody's trying to put their best foot forward. So you go to your pre-sentence investigation. I was as sober as the Pope. And then now you're looking at 5 years and like, God, I'd been drunk. I could have if I'd been a drunk, I could have saved a year. Right. So suddenly you want to tell them you're drinking, but now they're saying, well, were you lying then or are you lying now? And then the judge is maybe going to give you some whacking for obstruction of justice. And so a good sentencing consultant can help. And there is somebody I use and that I would refer people to if they have the means. And I would say in 25% of cases, they make a difference. In 75% of cases, they don't. Now, my practice has evolved. So most of the people I represent now are engaged in, or have been accused of very serious felonies. And so, if their cases go bad, they'll be lucky to get out on a wheelchair, and so I don't really work much with sentencing consultants, but a good one will help you. It will help you, a good one. And then I know I've been working with somebody whose case has been all over the news around the world recently, and they have a prison consultant, and I'm not sure what good this fellow is doing. Although there are so many lawyers involved in the client's life, he helps coordinate our communications with one another, so that's valuable.
High-paid secretary, administrative.
Well, if you're in and you can't do it yourself, somebody's got to do it. Yeah. And so, I don't know. I think for the formation of the attorney-client relationship is a lot like getting married. In fact, there are certain things I say to people, like when you call me up, and I don't know if I said it to you, but how'd you find me? Because that's the first thing I want to know.
You did. Yeah.
I read about you on the internet. Well, and then I'll say something like, that's a horrible way to pick a lawyer. I mean, how do you know any of that's true? And even if it is, maybe you read the wrong stuff, and so I don't make it easy to hire me. I usually ask people to think about it a little bit on what I call the first date theory. So, excuse the misogynistic anecdote here.
Makes sense.
You're a guy, the bar is closing. The woman the only woman in the bar is at the end of the bar. She's looking pretty good at 2:00 when the bar's about ready to close, but you don't want to wake up in the morning gnawing your arm off, And so
I think you said that to me actually, and you made me go home and think about it.
well, and you still have me on your show.
Yeah.
But I mean, I call it the first date rule. You should never propose to someone on the first date. Think about it for a while. People, when they go to see a lawyer, they're desperate. And if the lawyer gives them any reason to be hopeful, they fasten all their hopes on it. And it's sort of an irrational transference process. That's how a psychiatrist may refer to it. And so I want people to have a realistic sense of who I am, my strengths and my weaknesses. I'm a great courtroom advocate. I'm not much in terms of the warm and fuzzies. I've got the bedside manner often of a rattlesnake. It's not that it's not that I don't care, but I have only so many resources and I'm stretched pretty thin. And so, I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea.
Well, I know I found you. Actually, I went home and you said, think about it. And I want a pacer. And I looked up your cases and I found like 3 federal cases where you won. And everybody kept telling me, you don't win against the government. You don't win against the government. But wow, this guy has. He's won. He's got to be pretty good. And I remember Dave, my husband, saying, he won a case federal. We're hiring him. That's it. We're hiring him because he was devastated. He was the first one crying in the courtroom. That's all I could hear when I got sentenced. And I remember, and I had a question for you, and I've never asked you this. When I got sentenced, you turned to me and you whispered, "Do not cry. Do not let her see you cry. The judge see you cry." And I always wondered why you said that. Is it not good for them to see that?
I think it's more a question of my defiance and my respect for you. I don't, as I've said at the top of the show, I don't see the efficacy of prison, and I don't want your spirit broken by a process that is fundamentally irrational. You had time to pay a debt to pay to society. Pay your debt, but do it with dignity, and don't feed the beast, because the beast wants to drink your tears like the blood of an innocent to justify what they're doing. See, she's remorseful. I was right. I'm doing good work. I'm protecting society. I just wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Many years ago, a client of mine was accused of a federal death penalty offense. This was a gang shooting. The rival gangs in Hartford fighting over the cocaine market. And one gang had kidnapped a senior member of the other, tortured him to find a drug stash, and then stole the stash. Some months later, the tortured man's colleagues gunned down the leader of the other gang, shot him 13 times in broad daylight in Hartford. And I had one of the leaders of the gang who arranged the shooting. So as he was sentenced, it was Judge Arterton. And she sentenced him to multiple life terms plus 60 years. And so I'd kind of prepared him for this, and, count 1, life, count 2, life. And I turned to him and I said, you know what this means, don't you? What? First couple times you die, they've got to revive you, or it's an illegal sentence. Look at the bright side. So he started laughing, and we're in there laughing. And the judge got upset. Counsel, I failed to see the humor in this. And I said, well, if you do, there's nothing we can do to help you. We've still got, you can sentence my client to forever in jail, but you can't take his spirit or his mind. Or again, another case of mine, fellow's doing a life sentence on a murder. And I'll go to see him from time to time when I'm having a particularly bad day, because he's one of the calmest, beautiful souls that I know. Wow. And I said, how is it that you remain so much at peace given your prospects? And he's got tattoos from head to toe, and he says, they can do anything they want to my body, but they can't touch my mind. And so I think what I was saying to you, Jacqueline, is don't give an inch of your soul to these people. Don't let the beast have it.
It worked, because those words resonated so much with me. When I was in Danbury, very often I got into a couple of, not altercations, but women stuff, yelling at each other. Yeah. And I remembered those words every single time, even to this day. Don't cry. And I'll sit there and I won't. And I remember sitting there hearing your words, don't cry. And I never let them get the best of me. And
well, I mean, you can cry at home or you can cry with your loved ones, but these aren't people who love you. They're playing at justice, and they're breaking hearts. And, and your family was there. And, I mean, your kids were young. That's my dog barking in the background. Hey, Athena, knock it off. Border Collie. She listens. Go back to do your homework.
She's beautiful, though. She is beautiful. I see the pictures.
Yeah, she is. She runs my life. Yeah. We walk 7 miles every morning. So that's how we're doing our time in COVIDtopia, you know.
Well, it's good. It's good to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
it clears your mind too. I mean,
Yeah.
being in a, it frustrates me when you hear some of these celebrities say that, oh, I'm like in prison in their $1,000,000,000,000 house and they're sitting there quarantining for 14 days and they're off saying they're in prison. I want to just,
Yeah, you don't know the half of it, right?
right, right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. And so you do know, your name gets tossed around in prison. I brought your books with me to read while I was there. It's in the prison libraries, both in West Virginia and in Danbury. And those women, half of them have crushes on you. The other half want to hire you.
Well, you know, that's good to hear, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I try to be real about it all.
Yeah.
And, bad things happen, and bad things happen to good people and bad people. And I've represented good and bad people, but I've never represented a person that I didn't respect in the end and who I didn't empathize with and who I know had come to me and placed their entire hopes in my hands. And that's an amazing place to be as a professional. And it's a high wire act, and I sometimes fail, and I often accomplish far less than I think I could. But I always try. And
that's all any defendant needs and wants is respect and trying.
Yeah. And, in the end, we're all broken by fate. So, carry me out of the courthouse with my dying breath being, I object. This is an outrage.
Well, I respect you, Norm, immensely.
Thank you, Jen.
And I really do. I think it's wonderful. And what you go through has got to be hard on a daily basis. And I love having and hearing defense attorneys because people just don't see you as a people. I hear it quite often, oh, Norm Pattis. And you hear the good and you hear the bad, and they'll say, he's got no heart. I'm like, he's not supposed to have heart. Let
me tell you a story that kind of helped me a lot. When I was trying the baby off the bridge case, Tony Moreno's case, we were picking the jury, and I learned that my big brother died. The Big Brothers program. I'm an only child, and when in Detroit in the 1960s, as I was coming up, I had a big brother, and he'd have me to his house, and he had a son my age, and I'd go out there every other weekend, and we did a lot together. And he'd come to pick me up at 5 o'clock on a Fridays at a certain location. And I always knew that he'd be there. And I couldn't say that about my dad. Couldn't say that about my mom, who chose what she needed to get from life. And one of those things wasn't me, and that's life. But he was always there. And I hadn't been in touch with him for years. And when I heard he died, I did something I'd never done before at a trial. I said to the judge, somebody close to me has died, and I'd like permission to take a few days off to go to the memorial service. And the judge said yes. And I went to the memorial service. It was very moving. And I realized that one of the things that motivates me as a criminal defense lawyer is the memory of being 12, 13, waiting on a corner at 5 o'clock for somebody to come and knowing they'd be there. So I want to be that guy, I want to be that guy that's there at 5 o'clock when the courthouse opens or closes, and I'll be there. May not have the best stories to tell, may not have the best suit, may not even win your case, but I'll be there,
Same here. That's what I try and tell the women. For me, it's the consistency, knowing that I'll show up. I go to every one of their sentencings. I've flown to St. Louis for sentencings. I just went to one at White Plains.
Important to have a sense of humor too, and this is where people don't get it, because you got to always laugh. You got to look the devil in the eye and say, "That's all you got." So let me tell you the story of how I crashed my father's funeral. My father reemerged in my life when I was almost 50. He had disappeared the year Kennedy was killed, and the night before I was going to give closing arguments involving the death of a Middletown police officer. My client was accused of felony murder in the death of George Dingwall. Part of the Highway 91 outside of Middletown is named after Dingwall. So I'm in the office preparing closing arguments, and my secretary says, "There's a woman, your father's wife is on line 1." And I'd never talked about my father with anybody. And I'm like, what the fuck is what is this? So I said, who? My father's wife. So I pick it up, and there's this voice. hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm your father's wife. And I'm like, really? I hadn't heard anything
I
from
didn't
him
even know he had a wife.
for 4, much like 40 years. I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. So first two questions out of my mind. Tell me about heart disease and Alzheimer's. There. Yeah. Always the narcissist, right? So we got together and met, and it was difficult. And in the end, too much time had passed, and I don't think we had. We were not able to connect in a meaningful way. I was happy to meet him, but then I got word that he died, and he didn't want me to know. But I went to his funeral. So my wife and I drove down to Richmond, Virginia, and we knew where the funeral home was. And when I walked in, you could have heard a pin drop because his wife knew about me, but her family didn't. And I guess we looked a lot alike.
Oh, wow.
So I walk up to the casket and I give him a big kiss and I say my farewell, and I sat right down, and I thought the earth was going to open up and swallow me. And then I did cry like a baby when he was lowered into the ground. There was a lot that was left unsaid between the two of us, but I'm glad that I got to say goodbye to him.
Yeah. Wow. I'm telling you, that's a great story. I didn't know that you grew up with no father. I didn't know that.
A lot of kids do, right?
Yeah, it is.
Not something you talk about. When you're a kid, you don't notice it because you're just growing up and like, wow, everything is so exciting and amazing. And then, when you grow up and you realize, sometimes you put it together, and it's a source of sorrow for me.
Makes you appreciate family though, I bet.
I don't know. My kid, I think I have 3 kids. I'm sure they love me. The role is difficult because I didn't have a model to do it. And I remain, so, as I said, I turned 65. My kids are all in their 30s now, and they're all doing well. But when they left, to go to college, I remember thinking, well, I guess I'm done now. That's because I moved out of my house when I was 16 and hardly saw my mother thereafter. But they're all still coming around, and I'm stunned that they want to see me.
That's a great thing. I know my kids are coming around, but it's usually because they want money
or something to eat, right? Yeah.
I tell them it's the time they have to put it in my account. I don't put it in their account anymore. God. Well, this has been wonderful. I think our time is up now, and hopefully you'll come back.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been I'm really flattered that you would have me on your show. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's great to see you and great to talk to you.
Good to see you. Be well.
Bye, you too.